Tonight, Bobby Robson and his former protege go head-to-head. Robson faces Ipswich Town for the first time tomorrow since leaving to manage England in 1982. For George Burley, it's a confrontation with his ex-boss of 9 years. Join us in 20 minutes.
Thousands evacuated tonight as flood defences are breached. More panic, petrol buying, and the government's getting the blame. Digger that ripped apart the Taiwan jumbo jet. George W. Bush has to admit drink driving.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Monahan.
Good evening. The Army was called out tonight to help evacuate some 30,000 people whose homes in the centre of York are in imminent danger of flooding. The River Ouse, running at a level not seen for 100 years, is beginning to seep through the flood defences and very close to overwhelming them completely. The peak danger is expected a few hours from now. ITN's Terry Lloyd is there.
Hiya. Hello, sir. Basically, we're coming around to advise everybody that we've had information that the river's going to go above the flood barrier. We're advising for people to evacuate.
Most people needed no second warning and began stripping their homes of everything they could carry. The swollen River Ouse was just feet away and running at its highest for over 100 years. At 18 feet above normal, it was inches short of breaching the flood defences.
Panicking. I mean, yesterday we had like a flood here and I was having a laugh and joke, and today when they said move everything up, I thought, oh no, panic.
They've suggested that we evacuate. And,
what do you think?
It's a good suggestion, I would think. So my family are going up to my mother-in-law's and I'm going to stay here tonight.
Earlier from the air, the historic city's plight could be clearly seen. Riverside homes had already flooded. Only man-made barriers were keeping the river back from residential areas. Eventually, police decided they could wait no longer.
It poses a possible risk to life, in terms, particularly for the elderly and infirm. So we've taken the decision to evacuate various parts of York, and this being one of them, about 3,000 homes.
The evacuation is still underway, with residents struggling to carry clothes and bedding to shelter on higher ground. Schools have been opened to offer food and beds, but many have chosen to move in with friends and relatives. Meanwhile, the army has moved on to the floodwater front line to reinforce the sandbagged barricades. There's little else the city can do. Terry Lloyd, ITN, York.
Terry, what's the latest there?
Well, Dermot, much of the defences are holding, but I'd like to show you just how close they are to completely breaking down. Now, normally, the River Ouse would be 200 yards away from here, sitting in a deep, deep valley. But no, tonight, I can just come down and put my hand in the water. It's that close to the flood defences, these man-made barriers, and the big danger is that if it carries on rising, it'll gush over the sandbags and head into the housing estate over to my left. Now, just to explain what's happened here, it hasn't rained today, but the thousands upon thousands of gallons which have soaked through the Yorkshire dales and moors have now found their way through to the network of rivers throughout Yorkshire, and now the water has nowhere else to go apart from to barricade and flush up against the sandbags here.
So, Terry, what is the outlook for later tonight?
Well, high tide's expected in 1 hour's time. That's when everyone will be nervously watching and waiting just to see if there's a sudden gush of river water again, which overpowers the sandbags. And the latest news, I have to tell you, from York City Council is that the entire city is now on severe flood alert. That would mean that 35,000 homes are under threat tonight.
Terry Lloyd in York, thank you very much. Well, troops have also been helping out again today in the flooded Severn Valley. The water level still rising in the lower reaches of the river, but elsewhere in the west of England, people who were flooded out have been going home and seeing the damage. Mark Webster reports.
Late into the evening, army lorries ferried passengers between the two halves of Worcester, divided by floodwaters. Hundreds queued patiently for the short ride, which has kept the community functioning. Throughout the day, emergency services continued to rescue those caught by the surging waters, much to the relief of those who'd been trapped. From the air, it's clear vast tracts of land are impassable, and with more rain on the way, thousands more acres could soon be underwater. Livestock have found what little dry land there is, and this Midlands hunt showed it was undeterred by the floodwaters. In Upton-on-Severn, the speed at which the waters rose caught many unawares, and even those who prepared their own flood defences were defeated by the fact that this is the worst flood for 50 years. And this young couple in Bradford-on-Avon came home to the misery hundreds of others will soon share.
Which is quite completely trashed.
Every 5 minutes you discover something new. So it's just a case of plodding on for as long as we can and seeing what we can get out of it, really.
Though tonight here in Worcester, the flood level seems to have peaked and may even start to recede a little overnight, there is a far more severe trial yet to come for all the towns along the Severn River. If, as seems likely, there are storms further up over the weekend, a further fresh huge surge of water will come this way next week. And since all the fields around here are already completely sodden, the only thing that can happen is that the flood level will rise even higher. Mark Webster, ITN, Worcester.
Some filling stations have been running out of petrol today because of panic buying 10 days ahead of the next threatened price protests. The petrol retailers blame macho comments by government ministers for fueling the panic. Here's ITN's Paul Davis.
Despite yet another assurance from the fuel protesters that they're not planning to blockade refineries, there have been queues outside petrol stations across the country tonight. Throughout the day, motorists have heard the appeals not to panic buy and have ignored them.
I do have half a tank of petrol. I'm not desperate for petrol, but I am worried about it.
I was caught out last time, I don't want to be caught out again.
In many areas, the rush to top up millions of fuel tanks has led to temporary shortages, with petrol stations forced to close their forecourts. The Prime Minister visiting Newcastle today was still insisting the economy as a whole would not be sacrificed to appease the fuel lobby, but he said panic buying was unnecessary and disruptive.
There's no reason for people to change their patterns of behaviour, as others have said, but what is important is for us to explain why we're doing what we're doing as a government. And as as Jack Straw said, and I've just said now, we don't seek a confrontation with anybody.
While the Prime Minister is today urging motorists not to panic buy, he finds himself in an increasingly awkward situation. Many believe his own ministers are responsible for talking up a crisis and creating these queues by warning people to prepare for the worst. Earlier this week, the Home Secretary, talking to ITN, said people would be wise to keep their tanks topped up.
Many motorists, you'll find, are keeping their tanks fuller rather than emptier, as they did in the past. That's a wise thing to do.
The Petrol Retailers Association says it's not surprising motorists were panicked.
Unfortunately, too many strong messages, I believe personally, from senior politicians made the motorists believe that there was going to be a return to the September crisis.
Latest figures show petrol sales in some parts of the country are up 80% on this time last week. Paul Davis, ITN.
And Sue Saville joins us now from a filling station in North London. Sue, what's been going on there tonight?
Well, at this particular filling station, it's been closed for fuel sales since yesterday evening, and that is because of panic buying. And that is being reflected across the country. The figure mentioned there of 80%, that's in the southeast. Fuel sales up 80% over last week. In the Midlands, they're up 50%, and in Scotland, 25%. People not wanting to get caught out this time. There are fears, too, that people are stockpiling fuel, which, of course, is hazardous at any time, but particularly this weekend with bonfire night and fireworks around. And there is a legal limit to what can be stored privately, up to 15 litres at home and 10 litres in the car.
Well, are people likely to heed those warnings? Is the panic buying going to stop?
Well, it'll only stop if people do realise that panic buying isn't necessary at the moment, because the big difference between this situation and what happened in September is that then the oil refineries were blockaded and there was a limit to supplies. This time, protesters say they have no plans to blockade the refineries. Petrol companies say there's plenty of fuel for all 13,000 stations. We're expecting a delivery here at this station in the next hour. It will reopen, and the message here is that any shortages are short-term and people need not panic buy.
Sue, thanks a lot. Well, even without problems at the petrol pumps, the travel prospects in much of the country remain bleak. The best idea this weekend could simply be to stay at home. On the railways, flooding and track repairs are causing major disruption. Worst affected is the East Coast Main Line. There are no services between York and Newcastle. And the South West Main Line is still flooded between Taunton and Exeter. Most passengers can expect delays and are being advised to take alternative transport. Even if you've got a full tank of petrol, there's no escape on the roads. In North Yorkshire, the A1 is closed northbound at Scotch Corner due to flooding. In Worcestershire, the A38 at Sevenoaks is closed in both directions. All drivers are being advised to allow more time for journeys. So, widespread problems caused by the rain, and there's more on the way. On Sunday, rain and gale-force winds are forecast to batter Wales and southwest England, moving up to the Midlands and beyond in the evening. Most of England will be affected by Monday. It was confirmed today that the Singapore Airlines jumbo jet, which crashed on takeoff in Taiwan on Tuesday, was on the wrong runway, one closed for repairs. The airline accepted full responsibility for the disaster, which killed 81 people. Here's Harry Smith.
Amid all the complex theories for the Taiwan crash, a simple explanation emerged today. The most basic of pilot errors, a wrong turning.
The runway he should have taken takeoff on is 5 left, which is this one. The runway he took off from is 5 right, which is this one.
The runway was closed for repairs and blocked with a concrete barrier and construction vehicles. The aircraft was hurtling along at 150 miles an hour when it smashed into 2 mechanical diggers. The impact split the aircraft into 3 pieces, 2 of which burst into flames. The pilot, who's still being questioned by investigators, hasn't yet explained why he was on the wrong runway. The weather on the night of the crash was appalling, with the driving rain and howling winds of an approaching typhoon. One question grieving relatives are now asking is why this flight was allowed to even attempt a takeoff. Harry Smith, ITN.
Here, the High Court ruled today that the government acted unlawfully when it forced the people of the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean to leave their homes 30 years ago to make way for a military base. The ruling means that they'll now be able to return to all of the islands, apart from Diego Garcia, where the base belonging to the American Armed Forces is situated. The Republican candidate for President of America, George W. Bush, has today been fielding questions not about his policy, but about his past, specifically about the time, 24 years ago, when he was arrested for drunk driving. Our Washington correspondent, James Mates, reports.
It is well known here that George W. Bush was, in his youth, a heavy drinker. It was not known until now that he had once been arrested and fined for drunk driving. The timing could hardly be worse. Bush, who has been teetotal for the last 14 years, is taking the view, perhaps belatedly, that openness is now the best policy.
I was pulled over. I admitted to the policeman that I had been drinking. I paid a fine, and I regret that it happened, but it did. I've learned my lesson.
The Republicans are furious about the timing, slamming what they see as a policy of dirty tricks.
I think the American people are tired of this kind of gotcha politics. They're tired of this kind of last-minute dirty tricks. And I think the Democrats owe the American people an explanation.
The Democrats, of course, can hardly hide their glee. This may be just the break they're waiting for, but in public wanted to stay out of it.
I have no comment on this. I want to talk about the issues.
This is just not something the Gore campaign is involved with in any shape, way, or form.
George Bush will continue to campaign as hard as ever for these last 4 days, but must now await the public's reaction.
I've made mistakes in my life, but I'm proud to tell you I've learned from those mistakes.
For the past 2 weeks, the polls have pretty consistently said that the next resident here at the White House would be George Bush. Today's news throws some uncertainty into that. Such a story would not normally be decisive, but with it as close as it is, anything, however small, may make the difference. James Mates, ITN, Washington.
Manchester United have announced a huge sponsorship deal that will earn them £300 million from the sportswear company Nike over 13 years. Their current deal with Umbro runs out in 2002. The new arrangement will also earn United half of Nike's profits from merchandising. Tonight's main headline again, the whole of York has been put on full flood alert while we've been on the air, with 35,000 homes now said to be at risk of flooding. The peak danger from the River Ouse is expected about 5 hours from now. Tonight's financial figures, and the FTSE 100 index finished 6 points lower in New York. The Dow closed more than 60 points down, and the pound is trading almost 1/4 cent higher against the dollar. Now the main stories in tomorrow's papers. And the Times leads with police fears that fuel protesters are planning to blockade key food distribution centres as part of their fight against high levels of tax on petrol. The picture is of the Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott, up to his waist in Yorkshire's floodwaters. The Telegraph has a similar picture and reports that the government scientists have found no positive link between eating beef and catching the human form of BSE. The Mail says that 9 out of 10 chickens sold in Britain's shops are contaminated with dangerous food bugs. It claims a new strain of superbug found in poultry can lead to food poisoning and even paralysis in humans. The Sun leads with the troops called in to rescue 3,000 residents of York as the rising waters threaten to engulf their homes. And balmy is the Mirror's headline, which says the British public have turned into a nation of panic-stricken sheep over the threatened fuel protests. And that's the ITV Nightly News for tonight and this week. Our bulletins throughout the weekend will have all the latest on the floods. From all of us here tonight, good night.
Good evening. Another weather forecast, another weather warning. Tomorrow won't be too bad. It'll be generally dry for most of us, some sunny spells and a scattering of showers, but make the most of it because there's more wet and windy weather forecast for much of England and Wales in particular on Sunday. We'll have more on that in a second. If you are concerned by local river levels, then of course you can get more information from Floodline. There's the number 0845 988 1188. As far as tonight's weather is concerned, many of the showers inland will die away. A cold and clear night for many of us, a touch of ground frost around and maybe some icy patches too in the north where air temperatures will be close to freezing. The showers though will continue around the coasts and hills in the west and the north in particular. Tomorrow will be the best day that many of us have had for some time. Still forecasting some showers. Again, the north and west likely to see quite a few through the day, but central and eastern areas dry tomorrow with some sunny spells. And after that cold start, temperatures will recover back somewhere near normal between 9 and 11. That just gets into the 50s. 11 is 52. But then we are expecting another deep area of low pressure to come onto the charts through Sunday and Monday. Northern parts of Britain probably just stay showery, whilst further south, much of England and Wales will have strong winds, even gales in places, and more heavy rain. Now, this is the sort of storm we get once or twice a year at least in a normal winter. It's not like the storm we had last Monday, but it will bring more rain, perhaps an inch of rain to many places. And of course, there's just no way the ground can cope with that now. So any more rain and strong wind is bound to lead to more disruption on the roads and rails. There'll be heavy rain and gales and more flooding to come, we think, through Sunday and Monday. Tomorrow, though, half a decent day, sunny spells and showers. Good night.
Power Gen. Power, whatever the weather.
Coming up next in the Anglia News, the main stories across the region.
What do I know? I know Windows and the web. I know DVD-ROMs. I know we want a PC, not a Mac. And I know Dad needs some help.
Know everything about buying and using a PC for the home with PC Primer, free this week in the New Look Saturday Times.
Chicago Town deep dish pizzas. These guys are so versatile. You can cook them in the oven or in the microwave in just 3 minutes. And because they're individual, you can have them as a snack on the run or as a main meal. With fries, jacket potatoes, salad, beans, ice cream, apple, celery, walnuts, grapes, bananas. Are you tempted? Are you? Go a little thin on top. The Chicago Town pizza isn't. Its unique base means the filling stays deep and dishy right to the edge. Chicago Town Pizza, America's best-selling frozen pizza.
At PC World, people really do count. Because more people shop with us, we can have more people to help you. We've PC clinics in every store for advice, upgrades, and our complete PC health checks to keep your PC in peak condition for life. And we're still stamping down on prices. Before and after you buy, you can count on us.
Where in the world? PC World.
Mum wants me to win the lottery.
Dad hopes I meet a millionaire. I love what I've got. 2.5 bedrooms, a football pitch, works of art on the wall, and a car with a mind of its own.
Got love from Mum. Has it? Rachel.
What more could anyone want?
It's not what you want, it's what you want to keep that makes insurance important. And Britain's largest insurer is Norwich Union. Together we're stronger. Norwich Union.
In 10 minutes here on Anglia, there's comedy in Brother's Keeper.
Hello, good evening. There are reports of another outbreak of swine fever in the region. It's believed to be at Hempnall near Long Stratton in Norfolk. An announcement is expected tomorrow morning. A care worker who conned a pensioner out of her life savings has been sentenced to 4.5 years. Julie Tooley from East Winch near Kings Lynn stole more than £50,000 from 79-year-old Amy Reynolds. Malcolm Robertson reports.
It was her last day of freedom. Just as she'd done throughout her trial, Julie Tooley arrived at court concealing her identity. But this is the face of the woman who swindled a frail pensioner out of her life savings. She was supposed to be caring for Amy Reynolds and her husband. Instead, she was duping them out of more than £50,000. Tooley had already been convicted of stealing the money. Today she was jailed for 4.5 years, which included 6 months for a separate charge of stealing photographs and postcards from Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds. The judge, Daniel Worsley, said it was a crime that outraged the community, a betrayal of the increasing number of people up and down the country who care for the elderly. He described Tooley as a rotten apple. Prison, he said, would drive home the message that easy pickings can't be touched. Tooley was employed by Flagship Care and Support, who are contracted to Norfolk County Council. Today, the council's social services sought to reassure people receiving care.
I would urge people who have any suspicions of a carer, and that will be very unusual. It's a very unusual case, but people should make sure that they contact either the police or social services, and investigations will be undertaken.
Amy Reynolds thought Tooley was helping her move money from one account to another. Instead, she took her to the Swaffham branch of the Norwich and Peterborough Building Society and persuaded her to transfer more than £50,000 into an account Tooley had in her daughter's name.
There are absolutely thousands of home care staff across the region doing wonderful work, very important work. This is an unusual example.
Tooley's family and friends left the court without commenting on the sentence. Her barrister said the money had been used for her children, 2 of whom had serious health problems. Sending Tooley to prison, the judge acknowledged it would mean great hardship for her family, but he said it was an appalling breach of trust, which had to be reflected with a substantial jail sentence. Malcolm Robertson, Anglia News, Norwich Crown Court.
The parents of a missing teenager who disappeared in Norwich last month said today that they believe their son is still alive. Police fear 21-year-old James Toms from Whiton near Wells may have fallen into the River Wensum after a night out. Rebecca Holmes reports.
Linda and Michael Tom's son James disappeared just over 2 weeks ago after a night out in Norwich. As time slips by, their fears grow.
Really, you feel very empty and perhaps a little bitter, and you don't really believe it's going to happen to yourselves, and you hear about other people, but it really hits you hard.
James from Whiton near Wells was last seen on Thursday the 19th of October outside Time nightclub in Norwich. This CCTV video shows the 21-year-old being refused entry to the club by bouncers. He then walks off alone in the direction of Norwich Station. Police fear that James has drowned, but after numerous searches of the River Wensum, they've found nothing.
We disagree that he's drowned in the river. We still think he's alive somewhere, and somebody has seen him somewhere.
But Michael and Linda Toms know that leaving home without word is out of character for their son. And as the days go by, their hopes are fading. Rebecca Holmes, Anglia News, Whiton.
There's a historic weekend lined up in football. Bobby Robson's going head-to-head with Ipswich Town for the first time since he left Portman Road to become England manager in 1982. For George Burley, it's his first encounter against his ex-boss, who he played under for 9 years. Donovan Blake reports.
A date with Prime Minister Tony Blair, an unusual way for Newcastle manager Bobby Robson to prepare for tomorrow's game against his old club Ipswich. Robson spent 13 years at Portman Road, guiding them through arguably the most exciting period of the club's history, and he admits it's more than just another game for him.
There's a bit of meat in it for me. Obviously, I don't work for them anymore. It was my baby for a long time. You know, I passed the baby on, the baby's grown up, it's in the hands of somebody else. I'll always will treasure it and cherish it, but I've left it there now and it's going well, and I'm, living in another castle.
It'll be a special yet strange occasion for the current Ipswich manager George Burley. For the first time, he pits his wits against the man who moulded his playing career at Ipswich, and he hopes to match what Robson achieved there.
Bobby built the club from the early 70s and pushed it into Europe and winning the UEFA Cup and FA Cup. And I think as a manager you've got to look to do that, and things don't happen overnight. You're looking for a continual improvement, and I feel that's happened over the last 5 or 6 years at Ipswich.
So a sentimental journey for George Burley and co, who'll be bidding for their 4th straight away win against one of the town's most famous sons. Donovan Blake, Anglia News.
Finally, a new group has been launched in Essex to provide support for officers from ethnic minorities. The Essex Black Police Association held its first meeting today in Chelmsford. The group wants to see more officers recruited from ethnic groups. That's the news. Goodbye.
Good evening. Mainly dry tonight, just the odd shower possible over the North Norfolk coast. Lows down to 3 degrees inland. Still the chance of a scattered shower in the north tomorrow morning, but most places it's dry and bright with lots of sunshine breaking through. Dry and sunny everywhere in the afternoon. Gentle winds in the south, more breezy in the north. 10 or 11 the high, the low 50s Fahrenheit. And after a dry start on Sunday, it looks like becoming a wet and wild bonfire night. That's the late night forecast. Enjoy your weekend. Good night.
When an old friend comes to town,
So what are you really doing in London?
the past catches up with Glenn Vaughan.
I need that sell position now. You do know that he's not going to let this drop. He'll come for you.
You should have come to me before it got this far. You left your team exposed now, Diane's in severe trouble.
You had a straight choice last night. You want a pretty wife.
Guest starring David Threlfall in a new movie-length story, The Knock, Saturday at 9:05 on ITV.